Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. This segment is presented by Charles Schwab. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site, we have Jon Powers, president of CleanCapital and federal chief sustainability officer under President Barack Obama. And joining us remotely, we have Dr. Richard Munassi, managing director at Tampa Bay Wave. We're here to discuss how climate-focused innovation is being deployed to manage systemic risk, attract investment, and deliver measurable outcomes across industries from public infrastructure to the capital markets. It is great to have the both of you with us. Certainly an important topic as we are in Climate Week NYC taking place September 21st through the 28th. John, let's kick it off with you. It seems to be that it all comes back to policy and committing to American energy dominance.
Yeah, Jill, first of all, thanks for having me. You know, at CleanCapital, we're infrastructure investors, so we are buying and developing projects all over the country. I started CleanCapital after I left the White House. Specifically, my partner Tom and I saw an opportunity to really try to bring down the cost of capital into this space. And what's happened over the last 15 years is there's been a ebb and flow between policy, finance, and technology that's really aligned to allow us to we're backed by Manulife, which is a life insurance company. It's unheard of 15 years ago that that type of capital was in this space. But now the technology's proven, there's a huge demand for what we do in things like solar and energy storage today. But the policy has been ebb and flowed. And I think the challenge of that is how do we make long-term investments when we have uncertainty in the policy front? So we're constantly engaged, clearly at the federal level, but also very engaged at the state level as we're trying to figure out which policies we're able to really build projects under.
Yeah, and Dr. Munassi, that really is the key there in order for public-private partnerships and including academia within that equation to be successful, not only from a leadership perspective as it relates to innovation and the energy transition, but this is also a national security issue as well.
Yeah, it certainly is. When we think about our ports, we think about our oceans, we think about recent attacks that have happened both stateside and internationally. We do have to think through the lens as well of security for our waters. There's some great things happening, I think, at the federal level that aren't really being publicized, that I'm sure are being shared very nicely during Climate Tech Week in New York. And that we've really tried to key in on here at Tampa Bay Wave as we've engaged our partners from both sides of the table, both public and private sector. And certainly, I think, as John had mentioned, there has been a maturing of these technologies. There's been a maturing, certainly, of the investor landscape. You have your early adopters / first movers in the space from an investor perspective. Tom Ferguson, Burnt Island Ventures, one that I want to really kind of shout out in particular. So you have those initial trailblazers, and now more great people are coming to the table with backgrounds like John's that are certainly subject matter experts to help augment great technologies coming to market from both the public-private perspective as well as from a resiliency and security perspective as well.
Yeah, and John, really the key is here to reframe that climate investment base case.
Yeah, absolutely. And really focus on infrastructure, focus on long-term resiliency. And I think if you think about where the industry's grown, again, fall back 10 years ago, and big data center companies like Microsoft and Google, they'd be buying power from the grid. Today they have sophisticated energy procurement shops and policy shops shaping the landscape so they can make sure they can bring their infrastructure into these states. Yeah, there are great climate demand or climate impacts of the work we're doing for sure, but I come to this as a Iraq vet from a security perspective. Having more secure distributed grid is going to be more important for all of our growth from an economic perspective.
Yeah, and I think
John, you make
I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Munassi, go ahead.
I'll say, John, you make an excellent point there, right? This refocus to bring America back into the limelight as a leader in technology and the energy sector, that is something that this administration is really pushing, the current administration at the federal level, and that corporate is following to help really boost our footing when it comes to technology. We're behind in the race when it comes to areas like China that have been pouring billions upon billions into infrastructure within a country in which regulatory shifts are much better for them to move faster. And I think we're very quickly catching up thanks to great leaders on your side, of course, from the investor side, great founders building incredible technologies, and the great corporations that recognize the need to ensure our footing as a leader globally within the space.
Yeah, but John, that also means that we have to have a consistent policy and policy that makes sense at the end of the day, because it can be a little bit confusing when it doesn't necessarily lend to American first leadership when it's constantly shifting.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the energy landscape, for the last two decades, energy demand has grown, it's basically been flat. But because the AI demand, even crypto demand and data center demand, we are seeing massive growth in just the need for new supply. And because we are trying to truly handicap some of the supply with some of the policies that are coming out of Washington, everyone's energy prices are going to go up. And I think what we need to do, we talked about this a little bit offline, but solar is a $70 billion industry. They have almost 60% of new electrons brought on the grid this year alone were solar. Over the next 2 years, 84% will be solar. And to keep up with the demand that the data centers are bringing to the grid, we need all of that power on. And we need certainty from a policy perspective for us to bring the best cost of capital into the market.
Yeah. And Richard, I think that's a great point that John brings up, because back to the conversation around Microsoft, NVIDIA as examples where they are buying up and partnering with other companies for significant ownership of that energy supply, that could be concerning. I mean, now you're triaging with the local communities in which these grids and other power supplies exist, right? So how do you, triage that? And who's making that decision? Is it the companies, or is that the policy framework? I think that's the key question.
Yeah, and it's a great question. It's a great question that I don't think there's a current answer to. I think the next 6 to 12 months, maybe 18 months, are going to tell us quite a bit. When you think about different states too, how they handle their energy grids, a Texas versus a California versus a Florida, you're looking at massive shifts when it comes to that aspect of things. So I'm excited for the future. I'm very bullish on how we're looking at energy with regards to climate, the things that we can do in front of us. I think we're just really starting to see a big press forward in this regard.
Texas is a great example where years ago, it was a very nascent solar industry. When you had those blackouts for basically almost 2 specific winters in Texas, all of a sudden Texas is it's the #1 solar state in the union right now. And it's being literally stood up by solar and storage from a grid perspective. The head of what's called NERC, which sort of manages the security of our grid, specifically points to solar as the reason that they have the foundation to build out their grid there. It's fascinating. Like, that didn't exist 2 years ago. And they literally were having to shut down people's heat in the middle of the winter there, and people were dying.
Yeah, well, and that's what I think is so interesting about the space right now, because it's not just one source or single truth.
Right.
That's going to be, I mean, we need redundancy when it comes to energy, and the technology within the space, to your point, is fascinating, and there are so many investment opportunities here right now as well.
And it's a global marketplace. Like,
right.
The more we slow down our own innovation, the more we will lose to China in this rate, and we're seeing it, right? We're seeing this separately on EVs, but we're seeing it today. I just came back from the big renewable conference in Nevada, and there are tremendous new technologies coming to the table. We need to keep fostering that and keep fostering that growth if we want to keep our leadership.
Yeah, and Richard, what about the existing resources that we have in place? Are we thinking about improvements to the grid to make them more sustainable and adaptable? What are we doing in terms of, water is certainly a scarce resource, but it's an important resource. What are we doing with biochar? Like, some of these technologies exist, and back to my point where it's not a single source of truth in one particular type of energy. Where do you think the attention should be appropriately focused?
That's a great question. I don't think there's any 2 ways to skin a cat. I think there are definitely multiple areas where we need to focus both energy, time, energy, of course, no pun intended, time as well as dollars when both public and private sector. Certainly things around carbon capture, I think, are very interesting right now. Things when it comes to data and analytics, especially from a crop perspective, is something that I'm very interested in as we look at potential shifts in weather patterns, making sure that we can stay as ahead of the curve there as possible. And then lastly, and I'll bring this back every single time, to security, the security of our ports, the security of our borders, the security of our waterways, our energy infrastructure as a whole. The good thing is, I think we learned from a lot of those mistakes 2 years ago. And as a former Texan, I hope no other state has to go through the issues when it comes to energy consumption and ups and downs with the rolling blackouts and other power issues from a few years ago with Texas. So, I would say where we are right now is certainly light years ahead. We still have a long way to go, but the good thing is we are moving in the right direction as an organization from a country perspective, as well as large enterprise and startup and investor side too.
And John, when you think about how AI and that demand has really reinvigorated the energy transition and renewable energy conversation, now there's actual data where you can understand what your ROI is. And I think that was something that might have been lacking before when policy was very focused on mandates.
Yes.
And now you're able to see and understand where these efforts are going.
Yeah, that demand has changed the game. As you said earlier, we're going to be at a point soon where an electron is electron. So we'll go to a data center, we'll go to someone's home. And as we battle over the cost of that electron, people are going to want to push more and more things like solar to the grid because it's faster, it's cheaper, and it'll help balance the grid overall.
Yeah, and you know,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Richard.
I'll dovetail on that. I think nuclear too is something to look at going into the future from an energy perspective that just is still a little bit stigmatized. But I do think that's going to be changing rapidly, especially given the needs from a data center perspective around this heavy AI usage in public and private sector.
Yeah, and Richard, another thing to consider as well when you're thinking about bipartisan support in the circular economy, as you reskill, upskill, and appropriately skill the workforce, these are great long-term jobs, great salaries that will go back into the economy as well. The investment opportunity in the addressable market, I can't imagine why you wouldn't get both sides of the aisle agreeing on that.
And it's not just both sides of the aisle here stateside, it's actually globally as well.
Yeah.
We partner with a number of universities, University of South Florida, University of East London. You see initiatives at Vanderbilt. You see initiatives even at the community/state college level, community colleges of Connecticut, for example, where my friend John Maduco is president. You are seeing this massive upskill, reskill, cyber and health tech in particular, energy coming up right behind it.
I'm so glad you brought that up because we have done, and John, we've done segments with a number of the community college systems, NCCCS, North Carolina.
Yeah.
I believe there's 50 to 60 within the community college system partnering up with the private sector for the right skills. And it's encouraging that there is collaboration here.
Look, I'm from Buffalo, New York, right? This is an area that lost its economic engine for decades and is now seeing opportunity in these new skill sets and working with the colleges, University of Buffalo and others to try to build up that new workforce so people can stay in the region. The other big piece of this is manufacturing, right? There's no doubt about it. We went from 14th in the world to 3rd over the last 2 years in solar manufacturing. We're seeing these factories pop up all over the country, actually in a lot of Republican states. The governor from Georgia, who's a Republican, specifically went out and recruited in solar companies to areas that it was once the carpet center of the world, and it was on its, it was literally falling over. And he brought in solar, who stood up that community and good paying jobs for the future of that community.
Yeah, Georgia has done well. Speaking of ports, I know you'd mentioned the ports before. We had the Georgia Port Authority in a few months ago discussing what they're doing in terms of EV and other types of renewable sources as well. So Richard, as we think about wrapping up here, how achievable are some of these targets? Do we think we will get to some sort of end goal here?
That's a really good question. I actually am very bullish on this. I think those targets will be hit when it comes to a numbers perspective, a growth perspective. I think it's actually going to be faster than anticipated. A lot of the initiatives from the federal administration, though they do seem a little bit haphazardly deployed at times, do get us to those numbers quickly. And I also think the speed of innovation is pretty mind-boggling at this point. How quickly AI is moving, how quickly things are being deployed. Teams need to be much smaller now to get things to market. It's an exciting time, a little bit scary, but at the same time, very exciting. And I'm very bullish on both the impact for our climate, the impact from a blue perspective, and then also the impact to our economy, potentially in a positive way.
Yeah, and John, I'll ask you the same question as well as we wrap up here.
Yeah, I mean, just to differ a little bit from Richard, I actually think private sector leadership is what's going to get us to our goals at this point. But we're seeing a lack of public sector leadership in energy right now to Washington. And even in light of that, we're seeing great progress in our space and will continue to grow because the demand for what we do is there.
Yeah, all right. Appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.